A wealthy businessman is murdered in his Florida home.
There was blood spatter everywhere. It was on the walls, on the sink, on the bathtub.
It was determined that 10 shots had been fired, and it could have been 2 shooters.
And there are plenty of suspects, all with a personal axe to grind.
His dad left him to hang out to dry, and also emotionally abused him.
It turned out my father had this woman that he's going to lunch with her, going to dinner with her.
Are you best friends?
Beyond best friends.
Did you shoot your father?
Absolutely not.
When a hidden journal reveals the truth, a killer's motive becomes crystal clear.
You really see the inner workings of her thoughts.
This is a classic case of love and revenge.
My father pushed her, and she snapped.
Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned.
Friday, September 30th, 2011. It's a warm fall day in the seaside town of Jupiter, Florida.
Jupiter, Florida, a beautiful place, right on the coast in South Florida, very affluent, nice area.
We have some famous people that live in there. It's a really, really high-end community.
But even the wealthy enclave known as Admiral's Cove isn't immune to violent crime. Just after 7 a.m., private security guards respond to alarms set off at the home of Lanny Horwitz, his wife Donna, and their 37-year-old son, Radley.
One of the alarms detected a glass break.
The guard at Admiral's Cove actually went to the house in a golf cart, and when he got to the door, he was greeted by Radley Horwitz.
He must have been, actually on the street at the time because he arrived really, really fast.
Radley tells the guard he doesn't know what happened.
I still don't remember if it was my phone alarm or the house alarm that woke me up, but it was gunfire and screaming and the alarm going off.
Donna Horwitz was standing in the living room, very upset.
She was saying, Radley, your father. And she said, he was so awful. But she kept repeating, he was so awful, he was so awful, he was so awful.
Donna appeared to experience some degree of shock over what she said she found. She suggested that it was a suicide and that Lanny had been emotionally unstable and had talked about suicide.
Radley directs the guard to his father's bathroom, where he is met by a gruesome scene. Lying in the shower is 66-year-old Lanny Horwitz, covered in blood, with an apparent gunshot wound to his head.
The security guard saw Lanny on the floor with a gun in his hand. He did move the gun to the hallway, and then he tried to perform life-saving techniques and realized that Lanny wasn't breathing and there was no heartbeat.
Yes, this is Admiral Security calling in because we have a dead person.
Okay, did he shoot himself?
That's what it sounds like to me.
Okay, so he committed suicide.
Right.
This is a very secure, safe neighborhood, and there was no reason to expect that it had been anything but a suicide. When police arrived there at the house at Admiral's Cove, Donna Horwitz and Radley Horwitz were asked to be seated in the front seat of a car that remained in the driveway.
I remember I asked one of the cops, I'm like, is my dad, I felt like such an idiot, but I'm like, is my dad alive? He just shook his head, no.
The first thing I did was assess the scene in the bathroom. There was blood spatter everywhere, pretty much. It was on the walls, on the sink, on the bathtub.
The shower was still running. Mr. Horwitz was nude and had apparently been showering at the time that this had happened.
A single detail immediately stands out as odd to investigators.
He was kind of on his side, and there was a phone receiver next to his hand.
The way the blood splatter is, Lanny's trying to get to that phone that's in the bathroom, which if you're committing suicide, you're not going to try to pick up the phone.
Obviously, law enforcement wants to know what happened. What precipitated this event in this house? And was nobody else present?
I was shell-shocked. I couldn't believe that my dad was gone.
Born in Buffalo, New York on July 30th, 1945, Lanny Horwitz learned the power of money at a young age.
My dad's father was successful. He'd been a furrier, and then he got into real estate. So my dad grew up with 3 other siblings and had a happy, comfortable life growing up. But his father instilled a very good work ethic in him.
Lanny proved to be a natural entrepreneur and started building his own fortune at the age of 16.
He was very, very driven, very motivated. He was trading stocks. He was involved in real estate with his father, and he was a real go-getter.
Lanny was just as driven when it came to matters of the heart.
Lanny and Donna Horwitz met and started dating when she was about 15 and he was about 16.
The story my father told me was when he saw my mom coming down the stairs at this house that, like, he knew right then that's who he wanted to marry.
Donna, she had been raised with money.
My grandfather on my mom's side, Dan Carnevale, is very successful. He was a local baseball celebrity in Buffalo with the Bisons, and he knew absolutely everybody in town. My mom was very warm, and everybody loved her.
The two dated throughout their teenage years and got married in 1967, just before Donna's 21st birthday.
But the families were supportive. The wedding made the paper and stuff like that because of my grandfather. Like, everybody was pretty happy.
4 years later, Lanny graduated from law school and continued to pursue a career in real estate.
And my thing with a law degree is it's like karate. It's very good to know, and you hope you never need it. So being a developer, it was extremely helpful for him in business.
Donna and Lanny had their son Radley in 1974. A few years after that, they moved to get away from the harsh New York winters.
Buffalo, New York, the blizzard of 77, they're still talking about up there. And my father was stuck downtown for several days in an office building. It was that bad of a storm. That was what convinced my parents to do the pilgrimage down to South Florida.
Real estate in Florida has historically been very profitable. This was a ripe place to be able to come and make money.
The move paid off. Lanny quickly found success in the Sunshine State.
He provided very well for the family. Donna was a homemaker.
In Jupiter, the place that my parents built it was called Admiral's Cove. It was a private community, water access, and very affluent, very nice. A lot of money, nice cars, boats, golf courses, tennis, all that sort of thing.
Radley Horwitz was an only child. He had a very good education. He was a well-educated, very smart young man.
Growing up, most of the memories were happy with my parents, and we took a lot of trips. London, when I was a little kid, we were in Italy at the Vatican about a week before the Pope was shot. Went to Hawaii, and they started building this ridiculously big house up in Asheville, North Carolina.
To all outward appearances, the Horwitz family had it all.
They had a very high standard of living. I think there was a Maserati. They had the North Carolina home. They're flying first class. All the accoutrements to what people perceive as success.
But now, the good life has come to a tragic end. Initially called in as a suicide, Florida police are finding more evidence that Lanny's death may have involved foul play.
There was a bullet hole in a towel that was draped over the shower door, and it had stippling, which would be gunpowder burns on the outside of the towel, which tells you that the gunshot was from the outside and not coming from the inside of the shower.
It was clear to them that this was not a suicide.
Now we need to find out who killed Lanny Horwitz.
Coming up, scandalous secrets are exposed.
It looked like it was more than just a business relationship.
And detectives question whether they're looking for more than one suspect.
10 shots had been fired. It could have been 2 shooters.
After finding evidence that Lanny Horwitz was murdered, Florida police open a homicide investigation.
Once the medical examiner arrived, he rolled the body over and we were able to get a better look at the wounds on his body.
Even though you couldn't tell how many times he'd been shot, it was clear and obvious to the police that he'd been shot more than once.
We noticed there were multiple bullet wounds on his right arm, on his torso.
The medical examiner transports the body for further examination, leaving detectives to determine how and why the shooting happened and who did this.
There were projectiles pretty much everywhere in the bathroom. They were in the shower on the floor. There were some in the walls. There were some in the bathtub.
It was determined that 10 shots had been fired, at least one of which is what set the glass shatter alarm off.
The revolver found near Lanny's body provides an important clue.
The gun didn't have enough capacity to have fired all the number of bullets that had been fired.
So if the person was to use the same weapon, they would have to remove the casings and reload that firearm.
Investigators question if this could point to a second murder weapon or something even more sinister.
It could have been 2 shooters. There was a search warrant obtained from a judge to be able to search the house thoroughly from top to bottom.
In total, we collected about 26 firearms from the home. We weren't expecting to find that many firearms in the house.
There was a firearm found in a locked safe, and in the attic, there was a very extensive, expensive collection of firearms.
Most of the weapons are safely locked away and have not been fired recently. But they find one that has.
Another officer did find another firearm on the dresser in the master bedroom that's connected to where the bathroom is.
The gun is also a revolver with 5 spent casings. Detectives send the 2 revolvers to a crime lab for ballistics testing and continue their search.
They examined the perimeter of the home and determined that all the windows and doors were secure, locked from the inside. So there was no evidence that somebody had broken in.
Now we have to think, is it somebody who was let in the house? Was it somebody in the house?
It would be obvious that they would want to know from Bradley Horwitz and Donna Horwitz what's been going on.
Officers first try talking to Donna.
She was sitting in the front passenger seat of a car in the driveway. She was in her pajamas. She had bare feet. She had her knees up to her chest and rocking back and forth.
She kept saying, "Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy." And she just kept saying that sitting in the car, "Oh boy." My mom refused to talk to anybody.
She's not really communicating. She doesn't want to give a statement. So all of these things could be suggestive of somebody who's in a state of shock from trauma.
Her son, Radley, seems more capable of answering their questions.
The detectives asked to talk to me in their car, and they were parked right in front of the house. We sat in the car for maybe like 20 minutes. It was, so what did you see?
I was sound asleep, and it was like pop, pop, and the alarm was going off, and I heard screaming. I was scared.
My pocket door, there's a little alcove, and it looks across the living room and front entrance. My parents' bedroom was on the other side.
What was your mom's demeanor? How was she acting?
She was screaming.
Was she saying anything, what happened, or what's going on?
She was distraught, and, I got her some water, and she calmed, down.
Through the bedroom door, he caught a glimpse of his father.
My father was laying on the floor facing away from me, and then he made that horrible gurgling noise, and I got out of there. I never went into the bathroom.
When asked why he didn't immediately call 911, Radley claims he was in shock, and the guards showed up before he had the chance.
He was very confused about what had happened and, obviously and understandably very upset.
Radley says he didn't see who shot his father, but wants to help investigators however he can.
I was trying to, cooperate with them. They asked if they could do a gunshot residue test on me. I'm like, okay. Let's do the test.
But when investigators ask him if he knows of any reason why someone might want to do this, he reveals his father wasn't exactly a saint.
There were allegations or accusations that Lanny developed an affair or a more than business relationship with his business partner.
My parents wound up getting divorced in, 2000, I think. After my parents divorced, my mom thought he'd been involved with Francine. But then when my mom and dad got back together, my mom finds out that my father's going to lunch with her, going to dinner with her.
He explained that Francine was an acquaintance, that she was actually in business with Mr. Horwitz.
My father kept telling her that she was just a business partner, but it looked like it was more than just a business relationship. There was a lot of sneaky stuff going on there with her.
So clearly, Radley also shed some light on that relationship. He was, shocked and disappointed that his dad was going to continue with this behavior, which clearly was upsetting to Donna Horwitz.
He brought me something to sign, some legal stuff. And I'm like, what's this? And he goes, oh, I'm just doing something with the life insurance. Just sign that. So I sign it. And I found out later, I signed over $200,000 of his life insurance money to Francine.
That tells me that there's motivation there. She could have been looking to angle that for herself.
After learning of Lanny Horwitz's possible affair, detectives need to have conversations with the women in his life.
Our goal was, if one of them would agree to talk to us, we would let them tell us what happened. Donna Horwitz got an attorney right away, and we were informed by the attorney that she would not be speaking with us.
Thankfully, Radley knows where they can find Francine.
Francine lived right down the street, so she was in the same development.
detectives pay her a visit and deliver news of Lanny's murder.
She was very distraught, very emotionally upset, almost in shock.
Obviously, we've just explained to you that Lanny, who you know, has been found dead. Okay?
How then? Why?
Well, we'll explain all that to you, but we'd like to ask you a few questions first.
Francine says she and Lanny were supposed to be leaving that morning on a business trip to North Carolina.
We couldn't wait.
Okay.
He had planned this whole entire week of such fun at the Grove Park Inn.
To investigators, it sounds like more than just business, which seems to confirm Radley's suspicions.
Okay. If you don't mind my asking just a personal question, are you
This is never.
okay? Best friends?
Beyond best friend.
She found him to be very near and dear to her heart. She indicated, though, that Mr. Horwitz had deeper feelings for her than she was ready for at that time. She admitted that Mr. Horwitz had asked her to marry him, but she had declined that offer because, as she explained it, she was recently divorced and wasn't ready to move on.
Well, we were told that you and he had a relationship.
Oh, by her?
But that's not.
When they ask Francine about the life insurance policy, she says she didn't expect anything from Lanny.
Do you know who his beneficiary is on his will?
He said to me, Fran, I took care of you. I said, what? He said, I'm not going to laugh. Is there going to be a penny? Joking, Nicole. Right. And he goes, you'll see. Joking. Always joking.
Police did ask Francine where she had been around 7 a.m. She was able to fairly readily prove to them that she'd gotten up and was packing and getting ready to pick him up at 8. Clearly, she was very distraught about what had happened to him. And, you know, they were confident that Francine didn't have anything to do with this.
According to Francine, investigators should be looking at Lanny's wife, Donna Horwitz.
Francine told police that Donna Horwitz and Lanny Horwitz had been married, divorced. And there was discontent and arguments and a volatile kind of a relationship.
Francine tells investigators Lanny recently hit a breaking point and asked Donna to move out.
Francine told police that Lanny Horwitz had confided in her that he was afraid of Donna. According to Francine, she had said to Lanny Horwitz, you need to hide your guns.
When they ask her about Radley Horwitz, she has a similar response.
Is he your buddy?
We don't know. That's what we're trying to find out.
He's not a trophy son.
Okay.
Just a baby.
Right.
He said to me, if anything happens to me, promise me that you will fight to the end to see that I get justice.
Based on Francine's interview, Donna and Radley could both have motive. And when the autopsy results come in, they point to a crime of passion.
It was concluded that there were 9 bullet wounds, including one to the mouth.
The last shot in the mouth is overkill. That's an emotional reaction. That's a reaction that usually comes with anger or rage.
So police talked to the alarm company. In this case, in looking at the display panel of the alarm, no door had been opened prior to the 911 call.
There were only 2 people that could be suspects, Donna and Radley. Either Radley did it, Donna did it, or they both did it together.
Coming up, detectives pit son against mother.
Based on what you told us about the morning, it just seems like there's still something missing here.
But their suspects both refuse to crack.
He said, all I can tell you is there were only 2 of us in the house, and I didn't do it.
It's been 6 days since the brutal murder of Lanny Horwitz. And after speaking with Francine, investigators are determined to get answers. Radley Horwitz proves to be more cooperative than his mother.
His attorney arranged for him to arrive at the Jupiter Police Department for a videotaped and audiotaped interview with detectives.
Let's go over again. You tell us in your words what happened that morning.
I just saw like my mom screaming and running like in and out of the bedroom.
Radley goes on to describe hearing a clicking noise, as if a gun was running out of ammo but still being triggered.
Was the gun still in her hand?
You know, I don't know, so I'm not going to say. I don't know.
Detectives suspect Radley is holding back, so they push harder.
Based on what you told us about the morning, it just seems like there's still something missing here. I just want to ask you, did you shoot your father? Or were you involved in any way?
Absolutely not. I did not shoot my father. I was not involved in any way. I was woken up to gunfire.
Radley would only ever tell us, all I can tell you is there were only 2 of us in the house and I didn't do it.
Despite his insistence, Radley does admit his relationship with his father was rocky at times.
I remember them asking me if my dad was abusive, and I said only mentally. I used the term needling at the time. I thought that he could push your buttons.
The source of their conflict was connected to Radley's past legal problems.
My parents got me into guns when I was younger, and I really took to it. So I decided to get an FFL license, federal firearms license, and start a little gun business.
So we wanted to, at one point, buy an accessory that would transform a gun, you know, that was not an automatic into an automatic weapon, and didn't know if it was legal or not.
I showed it to my dad. I'm like, oh my God, look what these guys are selling online, this thing. And he says, just order it. And he's the smart one. He's the lawyer.
According to Radley, he said, I followed his advice and I bought it. Well, of course, the ATF, in short order, arrested Radley for purchasing that equipment.
As a result of that arrest, Radley's vehicle was confiscated and he was sentenced to federal prison.
I got 5 months down in a minimum security camp in Miami.
Because of the firearms conviction, Radley Horwitz was forbidden by law to ever possess a gun. He couldn't have his shop, and he largely blamed his father for that.
That was a huge, huge part of my life that was taken from me.
Radley has just confirmed his own potential motive for killing Lanny.
Radley was a suspect. I mean, there's no 2 ways about it. Again, 3 people in the home, 1's dead.
We knew at the conclusion of his statement, we wanted to go back to the house and see if anything was in there that was corroborative of what he was talking about. When he told us he went to his door and could look and see into the living room from there, could he really? So we went and looked ourselves to see that, yeah, you could see into the living room. And so it corroborated that he could see what he said he saw.
During Radley's interview, he also said after the shooting, he brought his mother a bottle of water to calm down.
Where'd the bottle of water go? We checked in the bathroom where Lanny Horwitz lay on the ground. There was a single water bottle on the sink right above his head. So we collected that water bottle to be processed for DNA. We're basically able to corroborate just about anything and everything that Radley Horwitz told us.
The detectives got the results back from Radley's GSR test, which was negative.
They didn't do it on my mom because she asked for a lawyer first.
Those results, and Donna's continued refusal to speak with them, lead investigators to one conclusion.
If Bradley didn't hurt his dad, it started to paint a pretty clear picture and corroborate what we had sort of suspected to begin with. It actually was Donna, and we need to prove it.
Donna Horwitz has become the prime suspect in her husband's murder. But since she refuses to talk, detectives must find another way to get answers.
While I was processing the water bottle for DNA, detectives found Donna's journal.
In her walk-in closet were lingerie drawers and small item drawers like that. And in one of those drawers was the book. It was an actual diary that dated back for quite a little bit.
Donna's diary reveals the Horwitz's lavish lifestyle to be nothing but a mirage.
Lanny Horwitz was upside down on the house. He was in dire need of money.
The most recent entries are about Donna's attempts to put her troubled marriage back together.
Beginning in January of 2011, the entries are just about daily, and they're very lengthy and very detailed. The diary was really black and white evidence in Donna's own words.
You really see the inner workings of her thoughts about this was the script that she had set in her mind for a happy life for both herself and Lanny.
It depicted a woman in Donna who desperately wants a family. But then we see her getting lost in her own self, her own mind. The diary starts to, he doesn't come home again. He's with Francine. He's this. The reality of how Lanny's treating her happens.
Detectives learned that in the spring of 2011, while the couple were divorced and living apart, Lanny asked her to secure a $200,000 loan from her parents.
He shared with her that if she could borrow this amount of money, they could move in together again. Donna believed together, if we can get this $200,000, we can get married again, we can be a family again.
But after Donna gets that money from her parents, she discovers Lanny isn't as invested in saving their marriage.
He would say, I'll be home at 5 o'clock and we can have dinner. And, he would share with her, oh, Francine and I had to go to a business dinner. We got tied up.
She'd written in there about, it was my birthday and we had hot dogs for the grill, but he took her to Three Forks on her birthday, which is a very nice steakhouse.
According to her diary, Lanny told her, if I had known that Francine felt about me the way that I do now, I would never have asked you to move back in the house. I think that was the turning point.
After that, her diary entries take a darker turn.
Donna becomes more and more aware of all the pieces of the puzzle that spell a different reality than the one that she's forecasted for herself and her family.
Donna couldn't even lie to herself anymore. She knew she got taken. And here she had gotten $200,000 from her mom, and what a fool she must have felt like.
You see Donna's words getting worse and worse and worse and rising in intensity through the diary to the explosion that is the homicide.
The last entry prior to the shooting, I think, was a week or two earlier, which was totally also telling because it'd been every day, and then it got fewer and fewer, and then just before the killing, there's nothing.
My father pushed her and pushed her and pushed her, and she snapped.
The diary, combined with the evidence collected from the house, gives detectives a clearer picture of how the shooting took place.
On the day before this crime occurred, he had plans on leaving for a couple of days to North Carolina with Francine. Matter of fact, he had his bags packed.
And he told her that he wanted her out of the house by the time he got back.
Now he wants to break up the family. Now he's very much made a definitive statement about, not only am I doing this, but I want you out of my life. So Hope, to connect together with him, disappears at that point.
If she couldn't have Lanny, no one was going to have Lanny. And she taught him a lesson. She just reacted with that firearm. Both firearms.
Ballistics confirm that after emptying all 5 rounds in the first revolver, Donna retrieved a second pistol from the bedroom and emptied that one too.
The total number of gunshots is clearly indicative of first-degree murder. That's somebody that clearly intends that the target of their shooting, they want them dead.
That was not a defensive shooting, a protect myself shooting. That was, you MFer, how could you do this to us?
On October 6, 2011, 1 week after Lanny's death, Donna Horwitz is arrested.
The hardest part of this entire case was trying to present the evidence in a methodical, logical, sequential form that a jury using common sense would come to the right decision. And we wanted to make sure we got it right.
In January 2013, Donna Horwitz stands trial for first-degree murder. Prosecutors paint her as a woman pushed to the brink by her husband's betrayal.
This was a jilted woman. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned.
We basically felt that a jury using its common sense would come to that same conclusion, that this is a classic case of love and revenge.
I remember Alethea McRoberts saying about, because the last shot was into his mouth, and that she said that you could tell it was a very vengeful, spiteful thing.
She may have just had enough with him speaking ill and silenced him.
Any bit of sympathy that I had left for my mom was gone when I saw those colored pictures of the worst thing I've ever seen.
The defense ultimately decides to claim Donna was innocent and points the finger at someone else.
They argued that it was Radley that did it.
My mom's lawyer said, I resented my father, and, either that I did it myself or that I hired a hitman.
That's terrible. Like, you talk about not winning Mom of the Year. That's not Mom of the Year. I knew it was a bad defense.
He was living for free in a very nice house in Admiral's Cove, with his dad. He had nothing to gain by hurting his dad.
The prosecution argues that the only thing less likely than Radley shooting his father is him hiring someone else to do it for him.
From our perspective, it didn't make a lot of sense. That was foolish to suggest that you pay good money, a lot of money, to hire a professional hitman and they don't bring their own gun. And there was no evidence of a third person. By checking with the alarm company, there had been no ingress or egress through a door prior to the glass shatter.
On January 17, 2013, the jury is left to consider its verdict.
After about 2 hours of deliberation, they found her guilty as charged of first-degree murder with a firearm, and she was thereafter sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Donna immediately appeals her conviction.
At the very, very end of the trial, the last seconds of the trial, the assistant prosecutor got up there and said, "Oh, by the way, she refused to talk to the police that morning." So,
You can't comment on a defendant's right to remain silent. That's a constitutional issue.
Approximately 2 years after the conviction and sentence, the appellate court felt that was significant enough to reverse the case for a new trial. The retrial, the strategy didn't change. We just went forward and retried the case again, almost identical to the first time.
4 years after Donna's first conviction, she is found guilty again.
She got a 32-year sentence, which is effectively a life sentence.
I do think justice was served. It's tragic that she was so heartbroken, but you just can't go and kill the person that broke your heart.
For mom to kill the father and then to blame your son, Donna will have to reconcile her life when Judgment Day comes for her, and I don't believe it'll be pretty for a person like her.
even though she tried to blame me, I was very sympathetic still to my mom until I saw the pictures of my dad, the morgue autopsy pictures. That was the end of any sympathy for my mom there. When I say I miss my parents, I miss, when I was growing up, when things were good. But, I don't miss the people that they became at all. What my parents did to me, I'm still here and they're not. And I sleep just fine at night.
On a quiet autumn evening in 1984, in a small Canadian community where neighbors knew each other and children could still ride their bicycles down familiar streets without fear, a 9-year-old girl disappeared. Her name was Christine Jessup. She was a child with a bright smile, a curious mind, and a life that should have been filled with ordinary childhood memories. She should have been thinking about school, friends, games, and the simple joys that define being young. But on October 3rd, 1984, everything changed. Christine left her home in Queensville, Ontario, a small rural community northeast of Toronto. It was an ordinary day. Nothing about it seemed different. Nothing suggested that it would become the beginning of one of Canada's most painful and unforgettable criminal cases. By the time the sun went down, Christine was gone. At first, there was fear, then confusion, then a desperate search. Her family hoped that she had simply wandered away, that she would return home, that there would be a simple explanation. But as the hours passed, the reality became harder to accept. A 9-year-old child was missing, and someone knew where she was. The disappearance of Christine Jessup quickly transformed a quiet community into the center of a national investigation. Police officers searched fields, roads, and nearby areas. Volunteers joined the effort. Strangers looked for a child they had never met. Everyone wanted the same thing: to bring Christine home. But behind the scenes, investigators faced a difficult question. What had happened during those missing hours? Was Christine still alive? Had someone taken her? And if so, who? The case became even more heartbreaking because Christine was not just a name in a police file. She was a daughter, a sister, a little girl whose family loved her deeply. Her parents, John and Janet Jessup, experienced every parent's worst nightmare. The uncertainty was unbearable. Every phone call brought a moment of hope. Every passing hour brought more fear. The waiting became its own form of suffering. In missing child cases, time is often the most important factor. The first hours can determine whether a child is found safely. Investigators know that every minute matters. Every detail matters. Every person who saw something unusual could hold a piece of the answer. But despite the enormous effort, Christine was not found. The investigation expanded. Police questioned people. They followed leads. They searched for any information that could explain her disappearance. The community watched as the case grew larger. A little girl from a quiet Ontario town had become the focus of an entire country. People wanted answers. They wanted to know who could harm a child. They wanted to understand how such a tragedy could happen. But as the investigation continued, another painful reality emerged. Finding the truth would not be easy. The case of Christine Jessup would become one of the most haunting investigations in Canadian history because it involved not only the loss of a child, but also a devastating failure of justice that lasted for decades. A man named Guy Paul Morin would later become connected to the case. He was a neighbor of the Jessup family. At first, there was no clear evidence that he was responsible, but suspicion began to grow, and eventually, Morin became the central focus of the investigation. The consequences would change his life forever. He would be accused. He would be convicted. And later, he would be proven innocent. The wrongful conviction of Guy Paul Morin became one of the most significant examples of a justice system failure in Canada. It revealed how mistakes, assumptions, and pressure to solve a shocking crime can lead investigators down the wrong path. But before the truth about the real killer emerged, years of pain, confusion, and unanswered questions followed. Christine's family had to live with the loss of their daughter while watching another man carry the burden of a crime he did not commit. The tragedy became larger than one crime. It became a story about grief, about mistakes, about the search for justice, and about the long journey toward the truth. More than 3 decades later, advances in DNA technology would finally reveal what happened. The real killer was identified, but by then, the person responsible was already dead. The truth arrived too late to bring Christine back. Too late to undo the years of suffering. Too late to erase the pain carried by everyone affected. But it answered the question that had haunted Canada for decades. Who killed Christine Jessup? The answer would expose the reality of a crime that began with the disappearance of a 9-year-old girl and ended with one of the most important lessons in Canadian criminal justice. A lesson about the danger of rushing toward answers. A lesson about the importance of evidence. And a reminder that behind every investigation are real people whose lives are forever changed. Christine Jessup was only 9 years old when her life was taken. She never had the chance to grow up. She never had the chance to experience the future that should have belonged to her. But her story continued. Through her family, through the search for justice, through the questions that remained unanswered for decades, and through a case that showed the world that even when the truth takes many years to emerge, the search for it must never stop. Because somewhere beneath the mistakes, the assumptions, and the passing of time, the truth was always waiting. Queensville, Ontario, was the kind of place where life moved slowly. It was not a city filled with endless noise, crowded streets, and strangers passing without looking at each other. It was a small rural community where people recognized familiar faces, where neighbors often knew one another, where children could spend afternoons outside, exploring, playing, and enjoying the freedom that many families believed was part of growing up in a peaceful environment. For many residents, Queensville represented safety. It represented routine. It represented the belief that terrible things happen somewhere else. Not here, not in their community, not to one of their children. But on October 3rd, 1984, that belief was shattered. The disappearance of 9-year-old Christine Jessup changed the way people viewed their own surroundings. A place that had once felt ordinary suddenly became connected to fear and uncertainty. The streets looked the same. The houses were still standing. The fields and roads were still there. But the feeling had changed, because everyone knew that something terrible had happened. Before that tragic day, Christine's life was the story of a normal young girl growing up with her family. She was born in 1975 and was adopted by John and Janet Jessup when she was still very young. For her parents, Christine was not simply a child who joined their family. She was their daughter. She was a part of their future. They built their lives around her, watching her grow, helping her discover the world, and creating the kind of childhood every parent hopes to provide. Christine was described as an intelligent and energetic child. She had interests, dreams, and the curiosity that many children her age have. At 9 years old, she was at a stage of life where the world was still full of possibilities. Every day brought something new. A new idea, a new discovery, a new memory. She was still learning who she was, still building friendships, still understanding the world around her. Her parents believed they knew the environment around them. They knew the community. They knew the people who lived nearby. They believed Christine was growing up in a place where she could be safe. That belief was not unusual. Many families and small communities share the same feeling. They believe familiarity creates protection. They believe knowing your neighbors means knowing the risks around you. But Christine's case showed that danger does not always announce itself. Sometimes it appears without warning. Sometimes it comes from a place people never expected. The day Christine disappeared began like many other days. There was no obvious sign that something was wrong. No dramatic warning. No moment that immediately revealed the tragedy that was coming. That is what made the case so painful. The last ordinary moments of Christine's life would later become some of the most important moments in the investigation. Investigators would spend years trying to understand what happened during those final hours. Who saw Christine? Who spoke to her? Who may have crossed her path? What small detail could explain the unimaginable? When a child disappears, the community often becomes part of the investigation. People begin looking back at memories. They remember conversations. They remember movements. They remember things that seemed completely normal at the time. A person walking down a street, a vehicle seen nearby, a neighbor acting differently. The human mind searches for clues after tragedy. It tries to find the moment where everything changed. But in Christine's case, the truth was hidden. The investigation began under enormous pressure. The public wanted answers. The family needed answers. And police faced the difficult task of solving a case involving a missing child. At that time, technology was very different from today. Modern DNA databases did not exist in the same way. Digital evidence was not available. Investigators depended heavily on interviews, physical evidence, and traditional detective work. Every decision mattered. Every theory had consequences. And as the days passed without Christine being found, the fear grew. The hope that she would simply come home began to disappear. The search became more urgent. The community wanted to believe there was still a chance, that Christine might be found safe, that there would be a happy ending. But the reality was moving in another direction. Eventually, Christine's disappearance became a murder investigation. The discovery of her body brought unimaginable pain to her family and the community. The search for a missing child became the search for a killer. And with that change came a new challenge: finding justice. When investigators begin a murder investigation, they must answer two fundamental questions: what happened, and who was responsible? In Christine's case, both questions would become incredibly difficult. The first question would take years to answer. The second would take even longer. The investigation would eventually focus on someone who lived close to Christine's family, a person who was not a stranger from far away, a person who was part of the community. This made the tragedy even more shocking, because it forced people to confront an uncomfortable reality. The person responsible for a terrible crime may not always look like the person people imagine. They may live nearby. They may seem familiar. They may exist within ordinary life. That realization changed the atmosphere in Queensville. People who once trusted their surroundings began questioning them. Neighbors looked at each other differently. The community that once felt united now carried fear and suspicion. The disappearance of Christine Jessup was no longer just a family tragedy. It had become a national story. Across Canada, people followed the case. They wanted justice for a little girl whose life had been taken away. They wanted to understand how such a crime could happen, and they wanted to believe that the person responsible would be found. But the road to the truth would be far more complicated than anyone expected. Before justice came, there would be mistakes. There would be accusations. There would be years of suffering. And there would be a painful lesson about how easily the search for answers can go wrong when the pressure to solve a case becomes overwhelming. Christine Jessup's story began in a quiet community, a place where people believed children were safe, a place where families believed they understood the world around them. But one autumn day changed everything, and the investigation that followed would become one of the most important and heartbreaking chapters in Canadian criminal history. Before Christine Jessup became known across Canada as the little girl at the center of a heartbreaking criminal case, she was simply Christine, a child, a daughter, a 9-year-old girl with a future ahead of her, a girl who laughed, learned, played, and experienced the world with the curiosity and imagination that only children possess. Her story did not begin with a crime. It began with love. Christine was born in 1975 and adopted by John and Janet Jessup when she was still a young child. For her parents, adopting Christine was not about giving a home to a child. It was about building a family. It was about creating a life together. From the moment Christine entered their lives, she became the center of their world. Like many parents, John and Janet watched as their daughter grew through the small moments that define childhood. The first steps, the first words, the first days of school, the little habits and personalities that slowly reveal who a child is becoming. Christine was described by people who knew her as a bright and thoughtful child. She was curious about the world around her. She enjoyed learning. She had the imagination and energy that made childhood such a unique period of life. At 9 years old, she was still at the beginning of her journey. She had not yet experienced the many stages of life waiting ahead. She had not discovered who she would become. She had not had the chance to chase dreams, build relationships, or create the memories that most people take for granted. Her life was interrupted before she could discover all of those things. But the tragedy of Christine's story is not only found in the way her life ended. It is also found in the life she should have had, the years that should have followed, the birthdays that never came, the ordinary days that were taken away. When people talk about victims of crime, it is easy for the person to become only a name connected to an event, a headline, a case number, a photograph in a news report. But Christine was more than that. She was a child who mattered to the people around her. She was someone whose absence created a space that could never be filled. Her parents did not lose a symbol. They lost their daughter. They lost the person who brought meaning and joy into their lives. The emotional pain experienced by John and Janet Jessup was unimaginable. When a child goes missing, families often experience a terrible mixture of fear and hope. Every passing hour creates new questions. Every sound outside the house can create a moment of expectation. Every phone call can bring the possibility of either relief or devastating news. For Christine's parents, the search became a race against time. They wanted to believe that their daughter would return, that she would walk through the door, that there would be an explanation. But the reality they eventually faced was one no parent should ever experience. Their daughter was gone. The child they loved was no longer coming home. The community also felt the impact of Christine's disappearance. Many people were shocked because Christine represented something familiar. She was a child from an ordinary family. She was growing up in a place many considered safe. Her disappearance forced people to confront the fact that terrible events can happen even in communities where people feel protected. It changed the way many people looked at their surroundings. The streets that once represented childhood freedom became connected with fear. The homes that once represented safety became places where people questioned what they really knew about those around them. But even as the investigation focused on finding the person responsible, Christine's life remained the most important part of the story. She was not remembered because of what happened to her. She was remembered because of who she was. A young girl who deserved more time, more experiences, more chances, The investigation would later become one of the most discussed cases in Canadian history because of the mistakes that followed. But before the wrongful accusations and the years of unanswered questions, there was simply a family missing their child, a family trying to understand how something so terrible could happen. Christine's case also raised deeper questions about society. How do we protect children? How do we recognize danger? How do we make sure that the search for justice does not create more suffering? These questions became important because the investigation would eventually show that the pursuit of answers can sometimes lead people in the wrong direction. The story of Christine Jessup became connected not only to the search for a killer, but also to a larger conversation about justice itself. But at the heart of everything was still Christine, a 9-year-old girl whose life was far too short, a girl who should have been remembered for her childhood, not for the tragedy that ended it. Her story reminds us that every victim has a life beyond the crime committed against them. They have dreams. They have relationships. They have moments that mattered. And Christine's moments mattered. The simple days. The family memories. The laughter. The small details that made her who she was. Those are the things that define her. Not only the case. Not only the investigation. Not only the tragedy. Christine Jessup was a daughter who was loved. A child who was wanted. A young girl whose future was stolen. And decades later, her story continues to be remembered because people still search for meaning in what happened. They search for justice. They search for truth. And they remember Christine not just as the little girl who was lost, but as the little girl who lived. A child whose life, although tragically short, left a lasting impact on an entire country. October 3rd, 1984, began like any other ordinary day in Queensville, Ontario. There was no sign that this day would become permanently connected to one of Canada's most heartbreaking criminal cases. For Christine Jessup, it was supposed to be another normal day in childhood, a day filled with familiar surroundings, a day surrounded by the people and places she knew. At only 9 years old, Christine was still living in a world where ordinary routines mattered. School, family, home, the small moments that made up her young life. But sometime that day, something happened that changed everything. Christine disappeared, and the simple question that followed would haunt investigators, her family, and an entire country for decades. What happened to Christine Jessup? The last known moments of Christine's life became some of the most important details in the investigation. Every movement mattered. Every conversation mattered. Every person who crossed her path became part of a search for answers. In cases involving missing children, investigators often begin with the hope that the child will be found quickly. They look for explanations that are less frightening. Maybe the child went somewhere unexpectedly. Maybe there was a misunderstanding. Maybe the child would return home soon. Families hold on to that hope because accepting another possibility is almost impossible. For Christine's parents, those first moments after realizing she was missing must have been filled with fear and disbelief. A home that had always represented safety suddenly felt different. A normal afternoon became a nightmare. Parents often describe missing child situations as a painful battle between hope and fear. One moment they believe their child will come back. The next moment they imagine the worst. Time becomes unbearable. Minutes feel longer. Hours feel endless. And every unanswered question creates more anxiety. As the search for Christine began, the community reacted immediately. Neighbors looked. Volunteers joined. Police began investigating. The quiet roads and fields around Queensville became part of a massive search effort. People who had never met Christine wanted to help because everyone understood something simple. A child was missing. A family was suffering. And every person wanted her to come home. But as the investigation continued, the situation became more serious. The possibility that Christine had not simply wandered away became harder to ignore. Authorities began considering the possibility of foul play. The search changed. It was no longer only about finding a missing child. It became a race to understand what had happened. The disappearance of Christine Jessup shocked Canada because of her age. She was only 9 years old. She was not someone who had chosen to leave home. She was a child who depended on adults for protection, a child who should have been safe. As investigators examined the case, they began looking at everyone connected to Christine's environment. People who knew the family, people who lived nearby, people who may have seen something unusual. This is one of the most difficult parts of any investigation involving a child. The person responsible is often not a stranger from a distant place. Sometimes the answer exists much closer than anyone wants to believe. That possibility created fear within the community. Neighbors began questioning what they thought they knew. The familiar faces around them suddenly felt different. Trust became complicated. The tragedy forced people to confront a painful reality. Knowing someone does not always mean knowing everything about them. Days passed. The search continued, but the hope that Christine would return safely began to fade. Eventually, the discovery of Christine's body confirmed what everyone feared. The case was no longer a missing child investigation. It was now a murder investigation. For Christine's family, this was the moment their greatest fear became reality. The uncertainty was gone, but the pain became permanent. The child they had searched for was not coming home. The community that had hoped for a different ending was left devastated. The investigation now had a new mission: find the person responsible. But solving the murder of Christine Jessup would become far more complicated than anyone expected. At the beginning, investigators faced enormous pressure. The public wanted justice. The media demanded answers. The family needed someone to be held accountable. But pressure can create challenges in criminal investigations. When a case receives intense attention, investigators must balance the need for answers with the need for accuracy. Because finding the wrong answer can create another tragedy. And that is exactly what would happen in the years ahead. The investigation into Christine's murder would eventually focus on a man named Guy Paul Morin. He lived near the Jessup family. He was part of the same community. At first, the connection between Morin and the case was based on suspicion and investigation. But over time, that suspicion grew. Eventually, Morin became the main target. The focus shifted from finding the unknown person responsible to proving whether Morin was the killer. The case against him would later become one of Canada's most famous examples of wrongful conviction. But at that moment, the investigation was moving forward with the belief that it had found the answer. Christine's death had created a desperate need for closure, a need to explain the unexplainable, a need to tell the family that someone had been found responsible. But justice is not only about finding someone to blame. Justice is about finding the truth. And the truth in Christine Jessup's case would take decades to fully emerge. The tragedy of October 3rd, 1984, was not only the loss of a young girl. It was also the beginning of a long journey filled with mistakes, unanswered questions, and painful discoveries. Christine's name would remain connected to one of the most important lessons in Canadian criminal history. A reminder that emotions cannot replace evidence, that suspicion cannot replace proof, and that the search for justice must always begin with the search for truth. Because behind every investigation is a real person. Behind every headline is a family. And behind every unanswered question is someone waiting for the truth to finally come home. The disappearance of Christine Jessup had already changed a quiet Ontario community forever. But the moment investigators confirmed the worst possibility, the nature of the case changed completely. The search was no longer about finding a missing child. It was about finding the truth behind a child's death. For Christine's family, the discovery of her body brought a devastating kind of certainty. The painful waiting was over, but the answers they needed were still missing. They knew their daughter was gone. They knew someone was responsible, but they did not know who. And that question would become the center of a decades-long search. The discovery of Christine's body shocked not only her family, but the entire country. People who had followed the case hoped for a different outcome. They hoped that the little girl who had disappeared would somehow be found alive. Instead, Canada was forced to face a heartbreaking reality. A child had been taken from her family. A child who should have been thinking about school, friends, and the future was now at the center of a murder investigation. For investigators, the discovery meant the beginning of a much more difficult process. A murder investigation requires answers, not guesses, not assumptions, evidence. Every detail surrounding the discovery became important. The location, the condition of the scene, the timeline, the possible movements of Christine before her death. Investigators had to rebuild the final hours of a 9-year-old girl's life. They had to look at the evidence and try to understand something that seemed impossible to understand. Who had been with Christine? Who had access to her? Who could have committed such an act? The pressure surrounding the investigation was enormous. The public wanted justice. The media followed every development. Christine's name became known across Canada. People wanted to know that the person responsible would be found. But criminal investigations are rarely as simple as the public expects. Finding the truth requires patience. It requires questioning. It requires the ability to consider multiple possibilities. And in Christine's case, the path toward justice would become complicated by mistakes and assumptions. In the early stages, investigators focused on the people closest to Christine's world. This is common in cases involving children. Detectives often begin by examining relationships. Who knew the victim? Who had contact with the family? Who had the opportunity? These questions are necessary, but they can also create danger if suspicion becomes stronger than evidence. A person who appears unusual is not automatically guilty. A person who lives nearby is not automatically responsible. The difference between suspicion and proof would become one of the most important lessons from the Christine Jessup case. As investigators searched for answers, attention eventually turned toward Guy Paul Morin. Morin was a neighbor of the Jessup family. He was not a stranger. He was someone who lived within the same community. That fact made the situation even more disturbing for many people. The idea that someone nearby could be involved created fear. People began looking at their neighbors differently. The community that once felt familiar became filled with uncertainty. But at the time, investigators believed they were following important leads. They believed they were moving closer to solving the case. The investigation against Morin would become a major turning point. He was questioned. His actions and background were examined. The authorities began building a case around him. Eventually, Morin would be arrested and charged with Christine's murder. For many people following the case, this seemed like the moment they had been waiting for. A suspect had been identified. A family might finally receive justice. A terrible crime might finally have an explanation. But behind the scenes, serious questions remained. Was the evidence strong enough? Had investigators followed the right path? Were they seeing facts clearly? Or were they looking for evidence that supported what they already believed? These questions would become extremely important later. The case against Morin would eventually collapse. New evidence would reveal that the investigation had gone in the wrong direction. And the person who had been blamed for Christine's murder was not the person responsible. But before that truth emerged, Morin's life was changed forever. The investigation that was supposed to bring justice created another tragedy. An innocent man became connected to one of Canada's most infamous crimes. The case became a painful example of how the justice system can fail when mistakes are made. But during the early investigation, few people knew what was coming. The community wanted closure. The public wanted an answer. And investigators were under pressure to provide one. The search for Christine's killer continued through evidence, interviews, and theories. Every possibility had to be considered. Every clue had to be examined. But the most important clue of all would not be discovered for many years. DNA technology. At the time of Christine's murder, forensic science was not as advanced as it would later become. Investigators did collect biological evidence, but the technology needed to identify the true killer was not yet available. The answer existed somewhere within the evidence. but it was hidden, waiting. For decades, the case would remain connected to unanswered questions. A little girl's murder, a wrongful conviction, a family searching for truth, and a justice system forced to confront its own mistakes. The discovery of Christine Jessup's body was the beginning of a long journey. It was the moment when Canada realized this was not only a story about a missing child, it was a story about justice itself, a story about how the search for answers can sometimes lead people away from the truth, and a story about why evidence must always come before certainty. Because in the end, justice is not about finding someone to blame. It is about finding the person who truly did it. And for Christine Jessup, that truth would take more than 3 decades to finally emerge. The murder of Christine Jessup had become one of the most painful investigations in Canadian history. A 9-year-old girl had been taken from her family. A community was searching for answers, and investigators were under enormous pressure to find the person responsible. But solving a crime is not only about discovering who committed it. It is also about avoiding the mistake of accusing the wrong person. And in Christine's case, that mistake would have devastating consequences. After Christine's death, investigators worked through every possible lead. They examined her relationships. They questioned people who knew the family. They looked at anyone who may have had contact with Christine before she disappeared. Every person who appeared connected to the case became part of the investigation. In the early stages, police focused heavily on the idea that the person responsible was likely someone close to Christine's environment, someone who knew the area, someone who had access, someone who may not have appeared suspicious at first. This type of thinking is common in criminal investigations, but it can also create a dangerous situation. When investigators believe they are close to an answer, there is a risk that they begin searching for evidence that supports their theory, rather than questioning whether the theory itself is correct. That is what would become one of the biggest problems in the Christine Jessup investigation. The focus eventually turned toward Guy Paul Morin. Morin lived near the Jessup family. He was not a stranger. He was someone who belonged to the same community. To many people, this connection immediately made him seem like a possible suspect. The idea that someone nearby could be involved was frightening. Neighbors began looking at familiar faces with suspicion. A community that once felt safe was now filled with uncertainty. But suspicion is not proof, and the difference between the two would become one of the most important lessons from this case. At first, investigators believed they had reasons to examine Morin more closely. They looked into his behavior. They studied his movements. They searched for connections between him and the crime. As the investigation continued, public attention grew. People wanted an arrest. They wanted someone to be held responsible for Christine's death. For Christine's family, the pain was overwhelming. They had lost their daughter. They needed answers. They needed to know that the person who had taken Christine from them would face justice. But the desire for justice can sometimes create pressure, and pressure can influence decisions. The investigation against Morin became stronger in the eyes of authorities. Eventually, he was arrested and charged with Christine's murder. For many people, this seemed like the end of the mystery. A suspect had been found. A case had been built. The search appeared to be over. But the truth was far from simple. The evidence against Morin was not as strong as many believed. The case would later reveal serious problems in the investigation. Important details had been misunderstood. Evidence had been interpreted incorrectly, and assumptions had played a major role. Morin's life changed completely. A man who had once lived an ordinary life became known across Canada as the person accused of killing a child. The accusation itself carried enormous consequences. Even before a final decision was made, public opinion had already created a judgment. For Morin, the investigation became a battle to prove his innocence. For Christine's family, it became another painful chapter in a story that already contained unimaginable loss. They wanted the truth, but the truth was still hidden. In 1986, Morin was convicted of Christine's murder. The conviction brought what many people believed was closure. But questions remained. Some observers questioned whether the case had been properly handled. Others wondered whether investigators had focused too heavily on one suspect. A conviction may end a trial, but it does not always mean the entire story is complete. Years later, those questions would become impossible to ignore. Evidence that had once seemed convincing began to fall apart. The justice system was forced to look again at what had happened. The conviction of Morin became recognized as a serious miscarriage of justice. A man who had been blamed for one of Canada's most tragic crimes was not the killer. The real person responsible was still free. And that meant Christine's family still did not have the answer they deserved. The failure of the investigation became a painful reminder that criminal cases must be built on facts, not assumptions. A person's life can be destroyed by a mistake. A family's search for justice can be delayed, and the real offender can remain hidden. The case of Christine Jessup became a symbol of these dangers. It showed how difficult it can be to solve a crime when investigators follow the wrong path. But it also showed something else: the importance of never giving up. Even after the wrongful conviction, the case was not truly closed. The evidence connected to Christine remained. The unanswered questions remained. And somewhere within the details of the investigation was the truth that had not yet been discovered. The person responsible had left behind evidence that would eventually become meaningful decades later. At the time, however, no one knew that the answer would come from science. No one knew that advances in DNA technology would eventually change everything. For years, the case remained a painful mystery. Christine's family continued living with loss. Morin continued living with the consequences of being wrongly accused. And the real killer remained unknown. The investigation had reached a dead end. But sometimes, a dead end is not the end of the story. Sometimes it is only the point where the search must begin again. And for Christine Jessup, the journey toward the truth was not over yet. For more than 3 decades, the murder of Christine Jessup remained one of Canada's most painful unanswered questions. A 9-year-old girl had lost her life. A family had lost their daughter. An innocent man had lost years of his life because of a wrongful conviction. And somewhere in the background, the person responsible had never faced justice. For many years, the case appeared frozen in time. The investigation had reached a point where every known path seemed to lead nowhere. The original theories had failed. The conviction had collapsed. The questions remained. Who killed Christine Jessup? And would the truth ever be discovered? But even when a case becomes cold, it does not mean the search is over. Sometimes the answer is not found through new witnesses or dramatic confessions. Sometimes the answer is waiting inside evidence that has existed from the beginning. Evidence that science has not yet been able to fully understand. That was the case with Christine Jessup. The breakthrough would come from something that did not exist in the same form when the crime happened: modern DNA technology. When Christine was murdered in 1984, forensic science was still developing. DNA analysis was not the powerful tool it would become decades later. Investigators collected biological evidence during the original investigation, but the technology needed to identify the person connected to that evidence was not available. The evidence existed, the truth existed, but the tools were not advanced enough to reveal it. As the years passed, science continued to evolve. DNA testing became faster, more accurate, and more powerful. Cases that had once seemed impossible to solve were reopened. Old evidence was examined again, and crimes that had remained mysteries for decades began to reveal their secrets. Christine's case became one of those investigations. The evidence collected many years earlier was reviewed with new technology. The goal was simple: find the person whose DNA matched the evidence connected to Christine's murder. The process was not quick. It required careful examination. It required patience. It required investigators to look back at a case that had already caused so much pain. But this time, they had something they did not have before: a new way to search for the truth. The DNA evidence eventually pointed investigators toward a man named Calvin Hoover. The discovery was shocking. After decades of uncertainty, the identity of the person responsible was finally revealed. The man who had committed the crime was not Guy Paul Morin. It was someone else. Someone whose name had never been connected to the case. In the original investigation, the truth that everyone had been waiting for had finally arrived. But it came with complicated emotions. For Christine's family, there was finally an answer. They finally knew who had taken their daughter. They finally knew that the man who had been blamed for so many years was innocent. But the answer came decades too late. Christine could not be brought back. The lost years could not be returned. The pain experienced by everyone involved could not simply disappear. The breakthrough solved one mystery, but it also revealed the damage caused by the earlier mistakes. The wrongful conviction of Guy Paul Morin became an important reminder of the consequences when the justice system fails. A person had been accused of a crime he did not commit. A family had waited years for the truth, and the real offender had remained unknown for decades. The discovery of the true killer showed the importance of continuing to search for answers, even when a case appears finished. It showed why evidence matters, why investigations must remain open to new information, and why certainty should never replace proof. The case of Christine Jessup became more than a story about a murder. It became a story about the evolution of criminal investigation. It showed how technology could correct mistakes from the past, how science could reveal answers hidden for generations, and how a single piece of evidence could change everything. But behind the scientific breakthrough was still the human tragedy. Christine was still the 9-year-old girl whose life had been taken away. Her family was still a family that had suffered an unimaginable loss. The DNA result could explain what happened, but it could not erase what happened. It could not give Christine back the childhood she never had. It could not give her parents back the years they lost. It could not undo the fear and pain created by decades of uncertainty. Yet the breakthrough was still meaningful, because truth matters. For families of victims, knowing the truth is a form of justice. Not complete justice, not perfect justice, but an important step. Christine's case also changed the way many people viewed wrongful convictions. It became an example of how investigations can go wrong when assumptions become stronger than evidence. The case demonstrated that even well-intentioned investigators can make mistakes. It showed that the justice system must constantly examine itself, because justice is not only about finding a suspect, it is about finding the correct suspect. The breakthrough in Christine's case came after more than 30 years of waiting. A generation had passed. People who were children when Christine was murdered were adults by the time the truth was revealed. The world had changed. Technology had changed. But the need for answers remained the same. A little girl's story had never been forgotten. The search for justice had continued. And eventually, the truth emerged. Sometimes time allows science to catch up. Sometimes the answers are hidden until the right moment arrives. And sometimes, after years of darkness, the truth finally finds a way to come into the light. For Christine, that truth arrived after decades. For her family, it brought answers. For Canada, it became a lesson about justice, a lesson about evidence, and a lesson that every victim deserves the truth, no matter how long it takes to find it. For decades, the name Christine Jessup remained connected to one of Canada's most painful mysteries. A child murdered, a family searching for answers, an innocent man wrongly convicted, and a killer who remained unknown. When the truth finally emerged through DNA evidence, it changed everything. The story that Canada thought it understood had to be rewritten. The man who had been convicted was not responsible. The real killer had never been held accountable. And suddenly, the justice system faced a difficult question. How could this happen? The discovery of the truth brought a complicated mixture of emotions. For Christine's family, there was relief in finally knowing what happened. After more than 30 years of uncertainty, they finally had an answer. They finally knew who was responsible for taking Christine away from them. But the answer came with pain, because no verdict, no investigation, and no scientific discovery could undo the years they had lost. Christine was still gone. Her childhood was still stolen. Her future was still taken away. The passage of time did not reduce the tragedy. It only showed how long the search for justice had taken. The case also brought attention back to Guy Paul Morin. For many years, Morin had carried the weight of a crime he did not commit. His name had been associated with one of Canada's most infamous murders. He had experienced the consequences of being wrongfully accused. A conviction does not only affect the person found guilty, it affects their family, their reputation, their entire life. The case against Morin became one of the most recognized examples of wrongful conviction in Canadian history. It showed how dangerous it can be when investigators become too focused on one theory, when suspicion begins to replace evidence, when the need for an answer becomes stronger than the need for accuracy. The justice system is built on the idea that evidence should lead the investigation. But Christine Jessup's case showed what can happen when the process fails. A person can lose years of freedom. A family can lose years waiting for the truth. And the real offender can remain hidden. After the DNA breakthrough identified Calvin Hoover as the person responsible, the legal situation became complicated. Hoover had died before the discovery of the DNA evidence. This meant there would be no traditional courtroom ending, no trial where witnesses would testify, no judge delivering a sentence, no moment where the family could see the person responsible face punishment. For many families, a courtroom represents a final step toward closure. It is where the truth is presented publicly, where responsibility is officially recognized, where justice is carried out. But Christine's case did not have that moment. The truth was discovered, but the person responsible was already gone. This created a unique kind of ending. The mystery was solved, but the justice process could not continue in the way people expected. The case became a reminder that solving a crime and achieving justice are not always the same thing. Sometimes the truth arrives after the opportunity for punishment has disappeared. Sometimes the answer comes, but it cannot repair everything that was broken. However, the discovery still had enormous importance. It cleared the name of an innocent man. It confirmed what Christine's family had always deserved to know. And it showed the power of scientific progress. The DNA evidence became the final piece of a puzzle that had remained incomplete for decades. A small biological trace, preserved through time, became the key to revealing the truth. It was a moment that demonstrated how much criminal investigations had changed. In 1984, investigators did not have the tools available decades later. In 2020, those tools finally revealed what had been hidden. The case became an example of how modern forensic science can help correct the mistakes of the past. But it also became a warning. Technology can solve cases, but technology cannot prevent every mistake. That requires something else: care, patience, objectivity, the willingness to question assumptions, the willingness to admit when something may have gone wrong. The Christine Jessup case forced Canadian authorities to look closely at how investigations are conducted. It raised questions about police procedures, about evidence handling, about the danger of tunnel vision. Tunnel vision occurs when investigators focus so strongly on one suspect or one theory that they stop fully considering other possibilities. In criminal investigations, this can be dangerous because the truth does not always appear in the direction people expect. The person responsible may not be the person everyone suspects. The evidence may not support the first explanation, and every possibility must be examined carefully. Christine's case became an important lesson for future investigations, a reminder that justice requires more than solving a case quickly. It requires solving it correctly. For Christine's parents, the years after the truth emerged were still filled with grief. Knowing the identity of the killer could not erase their loss. They still had to live with the reality that their daughter would never come home. But they also had something they had waited for: The truth. After so many years, Christine's story was no longer surrounded by uncertainty. The unanswered questions had finally been answered. Her family could finally say that the person responsible had been identified. The country could finally understand what had happened, and the justice system could finally acknowledge its failures. The story of Christine Jessup is not only about a crime. It is about the consequences of mistakes. It is about the importance of evidence. It is about the responsibility to protect the innocent while searching for the guilty. And it is about the fact that every victim deserves to have their story told accurately. Christine was only 9 years old when her life ended, but decades later, her name continued to influence conversations about justice and accountability. Her case changed how people viewed wrongful convictions. It changed how people understood the importance of DNA evidence, and it reminded society that the search for truth must never stop, because justice is not measured only by conviction. Justice begins with the truth, and after more than 30 years, the truth about Christine Jessup finally came home. Some stories end when the final question is answered. A mystery is solved. A name is revealed. A case file is closed. But the story of Christine Jessup is different, because even after the truth was discovered, her story continued to carry a message about justice, a message about the importance of remembering victims, and a message about the consequences that can happen when the search for answers goes in the wrong direction. Christine was only 9 years old when her life was taken away. At an age when children are supposed to dream about the future, she became the center of a tragedy that would affect an entire country. She should have grown older. She should have experienced the ordinary moments of life that so many people never think twice about. She should have had more birthdays, more memories, more opportunities, but those possibilities disappeared on a day that began like any other. That is what makes cases like Christine's so painful. The tragedy is not only in what happened, it is also in everything that never had the chance to happen. Every victim leaves behind an unfinished story. Christine's story was interrupted, but it was never forgotten. For decades, people continued searching for answers. Investigators continued examining evidence. Her family continued carrying the pain of losing someone they loved. And eventually, the truth emerged. But the journey toward that truth revealed something much bigger than one criminal case. It revealed the importance of getting justice right. The case of Christine Jessup became one of Canada's most significant examples of wrongful conviction. It showed that even when people are trying to do the right thing, mistakes can have devastating consequences. A person can be accused of something they did not do. A family can wait years for answers. And the real person responsible can remain hidden. The wrongful conviction of Guy Paul Morin became a painful reminder that justice cannot be built on pressure, assumptions, or the desire for a quick solution. It must be built on facts, on evidence, on careful investigation, because the consequences of being wrong are enormous. For Morin, the consequences meant years of his life connected to a crime he did not commit. For Christine's family, it meant years of uncertainty. For society, it meant facing uncomfortable questions about how such a failure could happen. But the eventual DNA discovery also showed something powerful. Truth can survive time, even after decades, even after mistakes, even after people believe a case is finished. Evidence can still speak. The science of DNA gave Christine's story the answer it had been waiting for. It revealed the person responsible. It cleared an innocent man, and it showed why cold cases should never be completely forgotten. Because behind every piece of evidence is a story. Behind every investigation is a person. Behind every victim is a life that mattered. Christine was not just a name in a historical case. She was a daughter. She was a child. She was someone who had people who loved her. That is the part of her story that should always remain at the center. Not only how she died, but how she lived. Her life was short, but it was meaningful. She brought happiness to her family. She had her own personality. She had her own dreams. She was a person before she became a victim. And remembering that is important, because true justice is not only about finding the person responsible, it is also about honoring the person who was lost. The case of Christine Jessup also changed conversations about criminal investigations. It encouraged discussions about improving police procedures, about avoiding tunnel vision, about recognizing the dangers of focusing too quickly on one suspect. Investigators must follow evidence wherever it leads, even when the truth is complicated, even when the answer is unexpected, because the goal of justice is not simply to close a case. The goal is to find the truth. Christine's story also reminds people of the power of persistence. For years, the case remained unresolved. Many people could have believed the truth would never be known, but the search continued. The evidence remained, and eventually, science provided the answer. This does not erase the pain. It does not restore the years that were lost, but it proves something important. The truth matters, even when it arrives late, even when it cannot change the past, even when it comes after decades of waiting. For Christine's family, the discovery of the truth was a final piece of a painful puzzle. They finally knew what happened to their daughter. They finally knew that the man who had been blamed was not responsible. They finally knew that Christine's story had been heard. Her life and her death became part of a larger conversation about justice, a conversation that continues today. The story of Christine Jessup is not only about a crime from 1984. It is about every victim whose story deserves to be told. It is about every family waiting for answers. It is about every person who has been affected by a mistake in the pursuit of justice. And it is about the responsibility society has to keep searching for the truth. Because every victim deserves more than a headline. They deserve to be remembered as human beings. Christine Jessup was a 9-year-old girl whose future was stolen. But her story helped change the future of criminal justice. Her case became a lesson, a warning, and a reminder that justice requires patience, honesty, and humility. The truth about Christine came after more than 30 years. It came after mistakes, after suffering, after countless unanswered questions. But it came, and that matters. Because even after all the years that passed, Christine's voice was never truly lost. Her story remained. Her memory remained. And the search for truth finally gave her the justice that she deserved. The story of Christine Jessup began with a disappearance. A 9-year-old girl, a quiet community, a family waiting for their child to come home. But what followed was not only a murder investigation. It became a story about justice, failure, science, and the endless search for truth. For more than 30 years, Christine's name remained connected to questions that had no answers. Who was responsible? Why did it happen? How could a child's life be taken away? And how could the justice system allow an innocent person to be blamed? The case became a painful reminder that every investigation is more than evidence and theories. It is about real people, people who lose years, people who lose loved ones, people who carry the consequences long after the headlines disappear. Christine Jessup was only 9 years old. She was still a child discovering the world. She was still learning, growing, and experiencing the simple moments that make childhood special. But her life was taken away far too soon. And because of that, her story became one that Canada would never forget. The impact of Christine's murder reached far beyond one family. It changed conversations about criminal investigations. It changed the way people looked at wrongful convictions. And it showed the importance of continuing the search for answers, even when time passes. The case revealed one of the hardest truths about justice. Sometimes the first answer is not the right answer. Sometimes the person everyone believes is responsible is not the person who committed the crime. And sometimes the truth takes years to appear. The wrongful conviction of Guy Paul Morin became a symbol of the dangers of investigative mistakes. Morin's experience showed how damaging a false accusation can be. A person can lose their freedom. They can lose their reputation. They can lose years of their life that can never be returned. At the same time, Christine's family continued living with the pain of losing their daughter. They were searching for justice, while also carrying the weight of knowing that the person responsible had not been found. Two different tragedies became connected to the same case. One child lost her life. One innocent man lost years of his. And the real truth remained hidden. The eventual DNA breakthrough changed everything. It showed the power of science. It showed that evidence can survive even when memories fade. It showed that a case that seems impossible to solve may still hold the answers. But the discovery also carried a painful reality. The person responsible was identified only after decades had passed. The courtroom moment many people expected never happened. There was no dramatic trial, no final judgment, no sentence. The truth arrived. But it arrived after the opportunity for traditional justice had disappeared. That is one of the most heartbreaking parts of Christine's story. The answer came, but it could not bring her back. It could not give her parents the years they should have had with their daughter. It could not erase the suffering. It could only reveal the truth. And sometimes, truth is the only thing left. Christine's case also reminds us why victims should remain at the center of every investigation. Too often, criminal cases become focused only on the search for the person responsible. But behind every investigation is a person whose life mattered. Christine was not only a victim, she was a daughter. She was a child. She was someone who had a family, a personality, and a future that should have continued. Remembering her means remembering the life that existed before the tragedy, the laughter, the memories, the love, the person she was, not only the crime that ended her life. More than 3 decades after Christine's death, her story continues to be discussed because it raises questions that remain important. How can we improve investigations? How can we prevent wrongful convictions? How can we make sure that the search for justice does not create another injustice? These questions matter because the pursuit of truth is not always simple. It requires honesty. It requires the courage to admit mistakes. It requires the willingness to look again at evidence that was once misunderstood. Christine's case showed that justice is not about being fast. It is about being accurate. A quick answer can be dangerous. A wrong answer can destroy lives. The real goal must always be the truth. The story of Christine Jessup is also a reminder that time does not erase the need for justice. Years can pass. Technology can change. People can grow older. But the importance of truth remains. Every unsolved case represents someone waiting, a family waiting, a community waiting, a victim waiting to have their story completed. Christine's story was finally completed through science. A small piece of evidence that had existed for decades finally provided the answer. It proved that the truth had always been there. It was simply waiting for the right moment to be discovered. And that may be the most important lesson from this case. Never stop searching for the truth. Never assume the first answer is always correct. Never forget that behind every crime is a human being. Christine Jessup's life was short, but the impact of her story has lasted for generations. She became part of a larger conversation about justice and accountability. Her name became connected with the need for better investigations and stronger protections against wrongful convictions. But above all, she remains remembered as a little girl whose life mattered. A little girl who deserved to grow up. A little girl whose future should not have been taken away. The case of Christine Jessup is a reminder that every person deserves justice. Not just a conviction, not just an ending, but the truth. And after decades of uncertainty, the truth finally gave Christine the recognition she deserved. Her story is no longer only about a tragedy. It is also about the search for answers, the importance of evidence, the courage to correct mistakes, and the belief that even after many years, the truth can still be found. More than 30 years after Christine Jessup's death, her name remains connected to one of the most important criminal cases in Canadian history. Not only because of the tragedy itself, not only because a 9-year-old girl lost her life, but because the case revealed something much deeper about the search for justice. It showed how fragile the process can be. It showed how one mistake can affect many lives. And it showed why the pursuit of truth must always continue, even when the answers seem impossible to find. Christine's story began as a heartbreaking crime, but over time, it became something larger. It became a lesson about the responsibility of investigators, a lesson about the importance of evidence, a lesson about the need to protect both victims and the innocent. When Christine disappeared in 1984, Canada was shocked. People wanted answers. They wanted to believe that the person responsible would be found quickly. They wanted justice for a child whose life had been taken away. But the years that followed showed that justice is not always a straight path. The investigation faced challenges. The wrong person was accused. A family waited for decades. And the truth remained hidden until science finally revealed it. The case became a powerful example of why criminal investigations must remain open-minded. Because every investigation begins with uncertainty. Detectives do not know the answer when they start. They must follow evidence carefully. They must consider different possibilities. They must avoid allowing assumptions to become facts. Christine Jessup's case showed what can happen when that balance is lost. The wrongful conviction of Guy Paul Morin became one of the most widely discussed examples of a justice system failure in Canada. His experience demonstrated that a conviction does not always mean the truth has been discovered. A courtroom decision can still be wrong. Evidence can still be misunderstood. Human judgment can still fail. That does not mean the search for justice is meaningless. It means justice requires constant attention. It requires people willing to question, review, and improve the system. The DNA breakthrough decades later became a symbol of that process. It showed that mistakes can sometimes be corrected. It showed that evidence can outlast confusion. It showed that even when people believe a case is finished, the truth may still be waiting. For Christine's family, the discovery brought a form of closure. After years of questions, they finally had the answer. They finally knew what happened. They finally knew who was responsible. But closure does not mean forgetting. It does not erase grief. It does not replace the person who was lost. For a family, losing a child creates a pain that never completely disappears. The truth can explain the past, but it cannot change it. Christine should have lived a long life. She should have experienced the ordinary moments that define growing up. She should have celebrated more birthdays. She should have created memories with her family. She should have discovered who she would become. That future was taken away. And that is why remembering Christine matters. Because victims are not defined only by what happened to them. They are defined by who they were. Christine was a daughter. She was a child. She was someone loved by her family. She had a personality. She had hopes. She had a life beyond the case file. The legacy of Christine Jessup is not only about a crime. It is also about change. Her case contributed to broader discussions about wrongful convictions and the need for improvements in the justice system. It encouraged people to examine how investigations are conducted. It highlighted the dangers of tunnel vision. It showed why investigators must constantly challenge their own beliefs. Because the goal of justice is not simply to find someone responsible. The goal is to find the person who is truly responsible. That difference is everything. A false conviction does not create justice. It creates another tragedy. At the same time, an unsolved murder does not disappear just because years pass. The victim still matters. The family still suffers. The truth still matters. Christine's case proved that time should never become a reason to stop searching. Advances in science changed the investigation. The same evidence that could not answer questions in 1984 became the key decades later. This showed how much forensic technology had evolved, but it also created a reminder for future generations. New technology is powerful, but it must be combined with careful investigation, fairness, and responsibility. Science can reveal evidence, but people must decide how that evidence is used. The story of Christine Jessup also changed How many people think about cold cases? A cold case is not a forgotten case. It is a case waiting for the right opportunity, waiting for new information, waiting for new technology, waiting for someone to ask the right question. Christine's case remained alive because people refused to let the search end. They continued looking for answers. They continued examining evidence. They continued believing that the truth was possible. And eventually, they were proven right. The story of Christine Jessup reminds us that justice is not only about the final moment when the truth is revealed. It is also about the journey toward that truth. The mistakes, the lessons, the changes, the determination. Every case teaches society something. Christine's case taught Canada the importance of humility, the importance of questioning, the importance of remembering that behind every investigation is a human life. A victim is not a headline. A victim is not just a name in a report. A victim is a person. Christine was a person, a little girl whose life mattered, a little girl whose story continues to remind people why justice must be pursued carefully, because when justice fails, the consequences can last for decades. But when the truth finally emerges, it can change everything. Christine Jessup's story remains one of tragedy, but it is also a story of perseverance, a story of science, a story of truth finally overcoming uncertainty. And most importantly, it is a reminder that every victim deserves to be remembered, every family deserves answers, and every search for justice must always begin with one simple goal: finding the truth. When people look back at the case of Christine Jessup, they often remember the investigation, the wrongful conviction, and the DNA discovery that finally revealed the truth. They remember the legal battles. They remember the questions. They remember the mistakes. But behind all of those events was something much more personal. A family lost a child. A community lost its sense of safety. And a little girl's life was reduced to a case that lasted decades. The human side of Christine's story is the part that remains the most painful. Because before she became known across Canada, Christine was simply a young girl. She had a family. She had people who loved her. She had a future that should have continued. The tragedy of her death is not only that she was taken away, it is that she was taken away before anyone could see who she would become. A child's future is full of possibilities. Every year brings new experiences, new friendships, new dreams, new discoveries. Christine never had the chance to experience those moments. Her story reminds people that every victim of crime is more than the event that ended their life. They are not just a photograph. They are not just a name in a report. They are a person with memories, relationships, and a place in the lives of others. Christine's family had to live with a loss that no parent should ever experience. The disappearance of a child creates a special kind of pain. It begins with uncertainty. A parent does not know what happened. They do not know where their child is. They do not know whether to hope or fear. Every moment becomes a question. Every day becomes a search. When the truth finally arrives, it can bring answers. But answers do not remove grief. They only change the shape of it. For Christine's parents, the discovery of the truth decades later could not return the years they had lost. It could not bring back the child they had loved. It could not erase the memories of waiting, wondering, and suffering. The passage of time changes many things, but it does not change the fact that a family lost someone irreplaceable. The case also showed the emotional damage caused by wrongful convictions. While the focus of the story was always Christine, the wrongful conviction of Guy Paul Morin revealed another painful reality. A person who did not commit a crime was forced to carry the consequences of it. His life became connected to a tragedy he did not create. His name became associated with something he did not do. This created another layer of suffering within the same case. The search for justice had accidentally created more injustice. That is one of the hardest lessons from Christine's story. The desire to find answers is understandable. The desire to hold someone responsible is natural. But justice must be careful, because when the wrong person is blamed, the real truth becomes harder to find. and the real offender remains hidden. Christine's case also raises questions about the role of the community. When a crime happens, people often look for a single person to blame, a single moment, a single action. But many tragedies are more complicated. They involve decisions, failures, and missed opportunities. They involve systems. They involve people. They involve moments when something could have been different. That does not mean responsibility disappears. It means understanding the full story matters. Christine's case showed that finding the truth requires looking beyond the easiest explanation. It requires patience. It requires courage. It requires accepting that the first answer may not be the correct one. The emotional impact of Christine's story continued long after the investigation ended. Many people who followed the case over the years felt connected to it. Parents imagined losing a child. Communities imagined the fear of not knowing. People questioned how something so terrible could happen. The case stayed in public memory because it represented something many people fear most: the loss of innocence. A child should be protected. A child should feel safe. A child should have the freedom to grow. When that protection fails, society feels the impact. Christine's story became a reminder that protecting children is not only the responsibility of families, it is the responsibility of communities, schools, institutions, everyone. Her case also influenced conversations about how children are treated, how warning signs are recognized, and how society responds to vulnerable people. The tragedy became a reason for people to think more deeply about prevention, not only about punishment after something terrible happens, but about what can be done before it happens, because the most important justice would have been preventing Christine's death. No investigation, no trial, no conviction could ever replace the life that was lost. That is why prevention matters. Awareness matters. Listening matters. Sometimes the smallest signs can reveal that someone is struggling. Sometimes a person who feels invisible needs someone to notice them. Christine's story continues to carry that message. A person's life can have an impact even after they are gone. The tragedy of Christine Jessup changed conversations about justice in Canada. It changed the way people thought about evidence. It changed the way people viewed wrongful convictions. And it reminded society that every case involves human beings, not just facts. At the center of the story is still Christine, a 9-year-old girl, a child whose life was too short, a person who deserved the chance to grow up. Her story is painful because it represents everything that was lost, but remembering her also means recognizing everything that existed before the tragedy. The love she received, the memories she created, the person she was, the impact she had. Christine Jessup's story is not only about a crime that happened decades ago. It is about the responsibility to protect the vulnerable, the responsibility to seek truth carefully, and the responsibility to remember the people behind the headlines. Because every victim has a story, every family has a journey, and every search for justice begins with remembering that the person at the center of it all was never just a case. Christine was a child, and her life mattered. Decades have passed since the name Christine Jessup first appeared in newspapers across Canada. The world has changed. Technology has advanced. Communities have grown. People who were children when Christine's story began are now adults with their own families and memories. But one thing has not changed. The questions raised by her case still matter. The story of Christine Jessup is not only remembered because of the tragedy that took her life. It is remembered because of what happened afterward. The mistakes, the search for truth, the lessons learned, and the reminder that every person deserves justice. Christine was 9 years old when she died. At that age, life is supposed to be filled with simple things: learning new skills, making friends, discovering the world, feeling safe. A child's world should be built around protection and love. But Christine's world ended in a moment of violence that no family should ever experience. The years after her death created a complicated story, a story where the search for justice itself became part of the tragedy, The investigation was supposed to bring answers. Instead, it created more questions. The wrongful conviction of Guy Paul Morin became a painful chapter in Canadian legal history. It showed that the justice system, like any human system, can make mistakes. People can misinterpret evidence. Investigations can follow the wrong direction. Confidence can replace caution. And when that happens, the consequences can be devastating. The case became a powerful reminder that a conviction should never be the only measure of justice. The real question is always, did we find the truth? Because a system that punishes the wrong person has not truly achieved justice. It has only created another victim. Christine's case forced society to think about the difference between solving a crime and solving it correctly. Those two things are not always the same. Finding someone to blame may bring temporary relief, but finding the truth is what creates real justice. The DNA breakthrough decades later showed the importance of this idea. Science was able to reveal what human assumptions could not. A piece of evidence that had existed for years finally provided the answer. The technology changed. The investigation changed. The truth finally became visible. But the discovery also carried a painful message. Sometimes justice arrives too late. The truth can come after years of suffering, after years of uncertainty, after years that cannot be recovered. For Christine's family, the identification of the real killer was important, but it was not a happy ending. There are no true happy endings in stories like this. There are only moments where unanswered questions finally receive answers. The pain remains. The memories remain. The absence remains. A family does not stop missing someone simply because the mystery is solved. That is why remembering Christine as a person is so important. Her identity should not only be connected to a crime. Before she became a symbol, she was a child. She was someone's daughter, someone's family member, someone who had a place in the world. Her story reminds people that victims should never disappear behind the details of an investigation. The evidence matters. The facts matter. But the person matters most. Christine's case also changed how many people viewed cold cases. For years, many believed that some mysteries might never be solved. Time seemed like an enemy. Memories faded. People moved on. But Christine's case proved that time can also bring new possibilities. Advances in science can reopen doors that once seemed permanently closed. Evidence can wait. The truth can wait. A case that appears finished may still have a story left to tell. This lesson has influenced the way many cold cases are approached today. Investigators now understand the importance of preserving evidence. They understand that technology may one day reveal what is impossible to discover today. And they understand that every victim deserves continued effort. Christine's story also raises another important question. What happens after justice is achieved? For many people, the answer seems simple. The case is solved. The truth is known. The story ends. But for families, the story never really ends. They continue living with the loss. They continue remembering the person who was taken away. They continue carrying emotions that outsiders may never fully understand. A criminal case may close, but grief does not follow the same timeline. For Christine's family, the years after her death were years of pain, uncertainty, and waiting. They waited for answers. They waited for the truth. They waited for the world to understand what happened. And when the truth finally arrived, it became part of a much larger story about justice. Christine's case also reminds society about the importance of protecting children. A child's safety depends on the people around them. Families, schools, communities, adults who notice warning signs, adults who listen, adults who act. Many tragedies are remembered because of what happened, but perhaps they should also be remembered because of what could have been prevented. The story of Christine Jessup encourages people to look closer, to take concerns seriously, to understand that every child deserves support and protection, because sometimes the moments that seem small can matter greatly. A conversation, a warning sign, a decision to pay attention. These things can change lives. The legacy of Christine Jessup is therefore not only about a murder case. It is about responsibility. Responsibility within the justice system. Responsibility within communities. Responsibility to remember those who cannot speak for themselves. Christine never had the chance to tell her own story, but others continued telling it. Her family, investigators, journalists, people who believed the truth mattered, and because of them, Christine's story did not disappear. Her name became connected with change, with awareness, with the importance of searching carefully for the truth. The case of Christine Jessup remains heartbreaking. It always will. A child was lost. A family suffered. Years were taken from people who deserved better. But the story also carries a message of hope. The truth can survive. Mistakes can be corrected. Justice can continue moving forward. Even after decades. Even after pain. Even after the world believes a case has ended. Christine's story reminds us that every victim deserves to be remembered. Every family deserves answers. And every search for justice must always begin with respect for the person whose life was lost. Christine Jessup was more than a case. She was a child, and her life mattered. Some stories remain in people's minds because they are shocking. Others remain because they change the way society thinks. The story of Christine Jessup belongs to both categories. It began as the tragedy of a 9-year-old girl whose life was taken away. But over time, it became something much larger. It became a story about the search for truth. A story about the consequences of mistakes. A story about the importance of justice. And a story about why every victim deserves to be remembered as more than a name connected to a crime. When people talk about Christine Jessup today, they often talk about the investigation. They talk about the evidence. They talk about the wrongful conviction. They talk about the DNA discovery that finally revealed the truth. All of these things are important, but at the center of everything is still a little girl whose life ended far too soon. Christine was not born to become part of a criminal case. She was not born to become a symbol. She was simply a child with a family, a child with memories, a child who should have had the opportunity to grow older. The tragedy of her story is not only that she died, it is that an entire future disappeared with her. The moments she never experienced, the dreams she never followed, the person she never had the chance to become. Those are the losses that cannot be measured. And that is why remembering Christine matters. Because every victim has a life before the tragedy. Every victim has a story beyond what happened to them. The case of Christine Jessup also changed the way many people looked at the justice system. Before her case, many people believed that once someone was convicted, the truth had been found. But Christine's story showed that a conviction is not always the same as justice. A conviction can be wrong. Evidence can be misunderstood. People can make mistakes, and those mistakes can affect lives forever. The wrongful conviction of Guy Paul Morin became one of the most painful examples of how the pursuit of justice can sometimes create another injustice. The system that was supposed to find the truth failed. An innocent person suffered. A family waited. And the real offender remained unknown. This is why Christine's case continues to be studied. Not because people want to remember failure, but because understanding failure can help prevent it from happening again. Every mistake has a lesson. Every tragedy has something society can learn from. Christine's case taught the importance of patience, the importance of evidence, the importance of questioning assumptions. Investigators must always remember that the easiest answer is not always the correct one. The first suspect is not always the guilty person. The first theory is not always the truth. Justice requires the courage to keep searching, even when the answer is difficult, even when admitting a mistake is painful. The discovery of the real killer through DNA technology, decades later, represented one of the most important moments in the case. It showed that truth can survive time. It showed that evidence can wait. It showed that even when a case appears impossible to solve, New discoveries can change everything. The technology that solved Christine's case did not exist in the same way when she was killed. Science had advanced. The world had changed. But the evidence remained. Waiting. The breakthrough proved something powerful. The past is not always closed. Sometimes the answers we need already exist. We simply need the ability to find them. However, the discovery also carried sadness. Because the truth arrived after so much time had passed, the person responsible was identified, but there was no traditional courtroom ending. There was no moment where Christine's family could watch a trial and hear a sentence. There was no final confrontation, no official punishment, only the truth. And while the truth matters, it cannot repair everything. It cannot return Christine to her family. It cannot erase decades of pain. It cannot undo the damage caused by the mistakes of the past. But it can provide something important: understanding. For Christine's family, knowing what happened was something they had waited for. For years, they lived with unanswered questions. They carried the weight of uncertainty. They wondered. They hoped. They searched. Then finally they knew. The truth gave them a piece of what had been missing for so long. Christine's story also reminds society about the importance of protecting children. Children depend on the people around them. They depend on adults to notice when something is wrong. They depend on communities to create safe environments. They depend on people being willing to act. The tragedy of Christine Jessup is a reminder that safety is not something that happens automatically. It requires attention. It requires responsibility. It requires compassion. The case also showed the importance of remembering victims beyond the crime itself. When a person becomes part of a famous case, their identity can become connected only to what happened to them. But Christine was more than a murder victim. She was a child who laughed, a child who had feelings, a child who was loved, a child who mattered. That is the memory that should remain. Not only the tragedy, but the person. The legacy of Christine Jessup continues because her story created conversations that are still important today. It changed discussions about wrongful convictions. It changed conversations about forensic science. It changed how people think about cold cases. It showed that justice must always be guided by truth, not simply by the desire to close a case. Because closure without truth is not justice. A case may be finished on paper, but the search for truth is never finished until the truth is actually found. Christine's story is a reminder of that. More than 30 years passed before the answer came, but the search continued. People continued asking questions. People continued examining evidence. People continued believing that the truth was possible. And eventually they were right. The story of Christine Jessup is heartbreaking, but it is also meaningful. It is a reminder that every life has value. Every victim deserves respect. Every family deserves answers. And every investigation carries a responsibility that goes beyond solving a crime. It carries the responsibility of protecting the truth. Christine was only 9 years old. Her life was short, but her story continues to influence people. It continues to teach. It continues to remind society that justice is not only about finding someone responsible. It is about finding the truth. And sometimes, even after many years of darkness, the truth can still find its way into the light. Some names become remembered because of greatness. Others become remembered because of tragedy. The name Christine Jessup is remembered because her story forced people to confront difficult questions about justice, truth, and the responsibility society is toward those who cannot speak for themselves. More than 3 decades after her death, Christine's case continues to affect people because it represents more than one crime. It represents the pain of a family who lost a child. It represents the suffering caused by a wrongful conviction. It represents the importance of evidence and the power of science. And above all, it represents the search for truth. Christine Jessup was only 9 years old when her life ended. At that age, a child's world should be full of discovery. A child should be thinking about school, friends, dreams, and the future. A child should be protected. But Christine's story became one of the most heartbreaking reminders that innocence can sometimes be taken away in the most devastating way. The tragedy was not only what happened to her, the tragedy was everything that never happened. The birthdays she never celebrated, the experiences she never had, the person she never had the chance to become. That is why her story continues to matter. Because behind every case file is a human being. Behind every investigation is a family. Behind every statistic is a life. Christine was not just a victim in a historical case. She was a daughter. She was someone loved. She was someone whose absence left a permanent emptiness. The decades after Christine's death became a complicated journey toward justice. At first, investigators believed they had found the answer. A suspect was identified. A conviction was reached. Many people believed the mystery had ended. But the truth was different. The person who had been convicted was innocent. The real person responsible remained unknown. This painful reality became one of the most important lessons from Christine's case. Justice is not simply about finding someone to blame. Justice is about finding the truth. Those two things may sound similar, but they are completely different. A wrong conviction can create the illusion of justice while allowing the real truth to remain hidden. That is what happened in Christine's case. The system moved forward believing it had answers, but the answers were incomplete. The wrongful conviction of Guy Paul Morin showed how dangerous it can be when assumptions become stronger than evidence. A person's life was changed forever. A family continued waiting, and the real offender remained free. The case became a reminder that investigations require humility. Investigators are human. They can make mistakes. They can misunderstand information. They can follow the wrong path. The important thing is recognizing those mistakes and continuing the search for the truth. Years later, DNA technology changed everything. A case that had remained unresolved for decades finally revealed its secret. The evidence that had existed since the beginning was finally able to tell the story. Science provided what time could not. It provided an answer. It provided clarity. It provided the truth that Christine's family had waited so long to know. The DNA discovery was a powerful moment. It showed the incredible progress of forensic science. It showed that evidence can survive. It showed that even the oldest cases may still contain the answers investigators need. But the breakthrough also carried a painful reality. The truth came late. Very late. The years that had passed could not be recovered. Christine's childhood could not be returned. The pain experienced by her family could not simply disappear. Solving a case does not erase the suffering caused by it. It only allows people to finally understand what happened. And sometimes, understanding is the only form of peace that remains possible. The case of Christine Jessup also changed the way people think about cold cases. For many years, people believed that some mysteries would remain mysteries forever. But Christine's story proved that time does not always defeat justice. Sometimes time allows justice to find new tools, new technology, new possibilities. A case may become quiet, but it does not mean it is forgotten. Somewhere, evidence may still exist. Somewhere, the truth may still be waiting. Christine's story also reminds people about the importance of protecting the innocent. Because justice is not only about catching criminals. It is also about making sure innocent people are not destroyed in the process. A justice system must protect everyone. The victims, the accused, the families, the communities. Because when the wrong person is punished, everyone loses. The tragedy of Christine Jessup also created a lasting conversation about responsibility. Responsibility to investigate carefully. Responsibility to question mistakes. Responsibility to remember victims as people. Christine's life should never be reduced only to the circumstances of her death. She was more than the tragedy that happened to her. She was a child with a personality. A child with people who cared about her. A child whose life had meaning. Remembering Christine means remembering that. It means looking beyond the crime. It means recognizing the human being at the center of the story. The legacy of Christine Jessup is not only about what went wrong, it is also about what people learned. It is about the improvements made after failure. It is about the importance of never stopping the search for truth. Her case became an example of why justice must be patient, why evidence must be respected, why every conclusion must be carefully examined, because the consequences of getting it wrong can last for decades. Today, Christine's story remains a reminder that victims deserve to be remembered, a reminder that families deserve answers, a reminder that truth matters, even when it takes years to find. Her story began with a terrible loss, but it also became a story about perseverance, about science, about correction, about the belief that even after decades, justice can still move forward. Christine Jessup never had the chance to grow up, but her story continues to influence the world around her. It continues to teach important lessons. It continues to remind people that every life matters. And it continues to carry one powerful message. The search for truth should never end, because every victim deserves to have their story heard. The story of Christine Jessup is a story that stayed alive because it was never only about a crime. It was about a child. It was about a family. It was about a justice system searching for answers. And it was about a truth that took more than 30 years to finally emerge. Some cases disappear from public memory after the final decision is made. Some stories become forgotten as time moves forward. But Christine Jessup's story remained because it represented something much deeper. It represented the need to continue searching, the need to question, the need to remember. Christine was only 9 years old when her life ended. At that age, the world should have been full of possibilities. She should have been discovering who she was. She should have been growing, learning, and creating memories. Instead, her name became connected to one of the most painful investigations in Canadian history. But Christine was never just a case. She was never just evidence. She was never just a headline. She was a person, a child, a daughter, a life that mattered. That is the most important part of her story, because when people talk about criminal cases, it can become easy to focus only on the investigation, the suspects, the evidence, the courtroom, the final result. But behind all of those things are people whose lives are permanently changed. Christine's family experienced a loss that no amount of time could completely heal. The years passed, but the absence remained. A child's room that became a reminder, memories that became precious, a future that existed only in imagination. The discovery of the truth decades later was important. It answered the questions that had remained unanswered for so long. But it did not create a happy ending. There are no simple endings in stories like this. The truth can arrive, but the pain can remain. Justice can move forward, but the loss can never be undone. The case also revealed the importance of protecting innocent people. The wrongful conviction of Guy Paul Morin became a powerful example of what can happen when the justice system fails. An innocent person can lose years, a family can suffer even more, and the real person responsible can remain hidden. This is why Christine's case became a lesson for future investigations. It showed that the desire to solve a crime must always be balanced with the responsibility to be accurate, because finding an answer is not enough. The answer must be the truth. A wrong conclusion may bring temporary relief, but it does not bring justice. Real justice requires patience. It requires careful examination. It requires the courage to admit mistakes. The case of Christine Jessup also demonstrated how much the world of forensic science has changed. When Christine was killed, investigators did not have the same tools available that exist today. Decades later, DNA technology provided the breakthrough. A small piece of evidence became the key. Something that had remained silent for years finally revealed what had happened. It was a powerful reminder that evidence has a voice. Sometimes that voice cannot be heard immediately. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes it takes new technology. But the truth can remain waiting. The DNA discovery changed the way many people viewed cold cases. It showed that time does not always mean the end of a search. A case that appears impossible may still contain answers. A mystery that seems permanent may still be solved. This gave hope to many families across the world who continue waiting for answers. Christine's story became a symbol of that hope. Not because the outcome was perfect. It was not. But because the truth was eventually found. And truth matters. Even when it comes late. Even when it cannot repair the damage. Even when it cannot bring someone back. Truth gives victims recognition. It gives families understanding. It gives society the opportunity to learn. Christine's case also changed conversations about the importance of remembering victims. A victim should never become only the tragedy that happened to them. Christine was more than the crime. She was more than the investigation. She was more than the questions surrounding her death. She was a little girl who had a life. A little girl who was loved. A little girl who deserved a future. That is how she should always be remembered. The legacy of Christine Jessup is also about the responsibility of society. A safer world is created when people pay attention, when people listen, when people act, when people care about those who may be vulnerable. Her story reminds people that every child deserves protection. Every family deserves support. Every victim deserves respect. And every investigation deserves honesty. Because the search for justice is not just about punishment. It is about understanding. It is about accountability. It is about making sure that the truth is not lost. More than 3 decades after Christine's death, her name continues to be remembered, not only because of what happened, but because of what her story taught. It taught the importance of evidence. It taught the danger of assumptions. It taught the need for fairness. And it taught that even after years of silence, the truth can still emerge. Christine never had the chance to tell her own story, but others continued telling it. Her family, people who investigated the case, people who studied the failures, people who believed that the truth was worth finding. Because of them, Christine was not forgotten. Her story continued. Her memory continued. And the lessons from her case continue to influence how people think about justice. The story of Christine Jessup is heartbreaking. It is a story of loss, a story of mistakes, a story of years that can never be recovered. But it is also a story of perseverance, a story of science, a story of truth finally overcoming uncertainty. And perhaps the greatest lesson is this: justice is not only about finding someone responsible. Justice is about respecting the life that was lost. It is about protecting the innocent. It is about searching until the truth is found. Christine Jessup was only 9 years old. Her life was far too short, but the impact of her story has lasted for generations. She remains a reminder that every victim has a voice. Every family deserves answers. And every search for justice must always begin with one thing: the truth. There are some stories that people remember because they are shocking. There are some stories that people remember because they changed history. And there are some stories that remain because they continue asking important questions long after the final answer has been found. The story of Christine Jessup belongs to that final category. Her case is remembered not only because of the terrible crime that ended her life. It is remembered because it forced an entire country to look at the meaning of justice. It forced people to ask difficult questions. How do we find the truth? How do we prevent innocent people from suffering? How do we make sure that victims are never forgotten? And how do we continue searching when time seems to have taken away every possibility of an answer? Christine Jessup was 9 years old when she was killed. A child. Someone who should have been protected. Someone whose life should have continued with ordinary moments of happiness. She should have had the chance to grow. She should have discovered her own dreams. She should have experienced the world beyond childhood. But instead, her story became connected to loss and unanswered questions. Yet Christine's identity should never be reduced to the tragedy that happened to her. Before the investigation, before the headlines, before the years of uncertainty, She was simply Christine, a young girl with her own personality, a child who was loved, a person whose life had meaning. That is what makes her story so powerful, because remembering victims means remembering the person they were before the tragedy. It means looking beyond the crime. It means understanding that every victim had a life that mattered. The investigation into Christine's death became one of the most complicated and painful cases in Canadian history. The desire for answers was enormous. A child had been taken from her family. People wanted justice. They wanted someone to be held responsible. But the case also showed the danger of moving too quickly toward a conclusion. Because justice is not simply about ending uncertainty. It is about finding the correct answer. The wrongful conviction of Guy Paul Morin became one of the most important lessons from Christine's case. It showed that even with good intentions, mistakes can happen. People can believe they're following the right path, while unknowingly moving away from the truth. Evidence can be interpreted incorrectly. Suspicions can become stronger than facts. And when that happens, innocent people can suffer. Christine's case became a reminder that the justice system must always protect the search for truth above everything else. A conviction alone is not enough. A confession alone is not enough. A theory alone is not enough. Justice must be built on facts, because when the wrong person is blamed, the real truth remains hidden. The eventual DNA discovery decades later became a turning point. It was a moment where science finally provided the answer that investigators had been searching for. The evidence that had existed for years finally became understandable. The technology had changed. The world had changed. But the truth had remained. This was one of the most important lessons from Christine's story. Truth does not disappear simply because time passes. Sometimes it waits. It waits for better technology. It waits for new methods. It waits for someone to continue searching. The DNA breakthrough also gave hope to other families who continue living with unanswered questions. It showed that cold cases are not always forgotten cases. They are cases waiting for another opportunity, another discovery, another moment when the truth can finally be revealed. But even after the answer was found, Christine's story did not become simple. Because knowing the truth does not erase the pain. It does not return lost years. It does not bring back the child who was taken away. For Christine's family, the discovery was important. After decades of uncertainty, they finally knew what happened. But knowing is different from healing. Some wounds remain. Some memories remain painful. Some losses cannot be repaired. The story of Christine Jessup also reminds society that justice is about more than punishment. It is about responsibility. Responsibility to investigate carefully. Responsibility to learn from mistakes. Responsibility to make sure future victims and families receive better support. Every tragedy carries lessons. Christine's case became a lesson about improving investigations. It became a lesson about respecting evidence. It became a lesson about questioning assumptions. And it became a lesson about never forgetting the human beings behind the case. Because criminal cases can sometimes become focused on names and details. But behind every name is a person. Behind every investigation is a family. Behind every victim is a story. Christine was a child whose story was interrupted, but her memory continues. Her case continues to influence conversations about justice. Her story continues to remind people why accuracy matters, why fairness matters, why truth matters. The legacy of Christine Jessup is not only found in the discovery of the person responsible, it is also found in the changes that followed, in the awareness created, in the discussion started, in the understanding that justice must always be handled with care. Her story became part of a larger conversation about how society responds when something goes wrong. How do we correct mistakes? How do we rebuild trust? How do we make sure that the pursuit of justice does not create another tragedy? These questions remain important because justice is not perfect. It is created by people, and people must constantly learn, improve, and challenge themselves. Christine's case shows that the search for truth can be long. It can be painful. It can require patience. But it is always worth continuing. Because every victim deserves answers. Every family deserves recognition. Every innocent person deserves protection. And every investigation deserves honesty. Christine Jessup's life was short, but the impact of her story has lasted for decades. She became a reminder that victims should never be forgotten. She became a reminder that evidence matters. She became a reminder that truth can survive even the longest silence. The world lost Christine when she was only 9 years old. But her story continues to teach. It continues to influence. It continues to remind people that behind every case is a human life. A life that mattered. A life that deserved more time. A life that should always be remembered. Christine Jessup was not just part of a crime story. She was a child, and that is why her story will never truly end. The passage of time changes many things. Cities grow. People move forward. Technology advances. New generations are born. But some stories remain because they represent something that cannot be forgotten. The story of Christine Jessup is one of those stories. More than 30 years have passed since the tragedy that ended her life. More than 30 years since a 9-year-old girl disappeared. More than 30 years since a family began a painful journey, searching for answers. And yet, Christine's story continues to be remembered. Not only because of the crime, not only because of the investigation, but because of the lessons her case left behind. Christine Jessup's story became a reminder that justice is not just about reaching an ending. It is about reaching the right ending. It is about discovering the truth. Because without truth, there can be no real justice. The case showed the world that even when people believe they have found the answer, they must continue asking questions. They must continue examining evidence. They must continue searching for what is real. The tragedy of Christine's case was not only that her life was taken away, it was also that the years after her death were filled with uncertainty, mistakes, and unanswered questions. Her family had to live with a pain that no parent should ever know. They lost a child. They lost the future they imagined for her. They lost all the moments that should have come. Every birthday, every milestone, every memory that would have been created. Those moments disappeared forever. And that is something no investigation, no court decision, and no scientific discovery can ever truly repair. But the search for truth still mattered. Because Christine mattered. The eventual DNA breakthrough decades later showed one of the most powerful ideas in modern criminal investigation. The truth can survive, even when years pass, even when memories fade, even when people believe a case has reached its end. Evidence can remain. Waiting. The technology may not exist today. The answers may not be available immediately, but the truth can still be found. Christine's case became an example of the importance of never abandoning the search for justice. Many families around the world continue waiting for answers in unsolved cases. They continue hoping. They continue asking questions. And Christine's story showed them that time does not always mean the end. Sometimes time brings new opportunities, new discoveries, new ways to uncover what was hidden. The science that eventually revealed the truth in Christine's case also changed how society viewed forensic evidence. DNA became more than a scientific tool. It became a bridge between the past and the present. It connected evidence from decades earlier to the truth of what happened. It showed that even the smallest detail can become the most important piece of a mystery. But the case also showed that science alone is not enough. Evidence is powerful, but people must use it correctly. Investigations require careful thinking. They require fairness. They require the willingness to admit when something went wrong. The wrongful conviction connected to Christine's case remains one of the most painful parts of the story. It showed that the justice system can create harm when mistakes are not recognized. A person who did not commit the crime suffered. A family continued waiting. And the real truth remained hidden. This is why Christine's story became more than a murder investigation. It became a lesson about responsibility, a lesson about the importance of protecting the innocent, a lesson about why every conclusion must be supported by facts, because justice should never be based only on the need for an answer. It should be based on the need for the truth. The case also changed conversations about how society remembers victims. When a crime becomes famous, there is a danger that the victim becomes known only through the tragedy. Their life before the crime becomes forgotten. But Christine deserves to be remembered differently. She was not just the girl in a case file. She was a child. She had a personality. She had people who cared about her. She had a place in the world. Her life had value before anyone knew her name. That is the memory that matters most. The memory of Christine as a person, not only as a victim. Her story also reminds people that justice is not something that belongs only in courtrooms. Justice exists in how society treats people, how society protects children, how society supports families, how society responds when mistakes happen. A stronger justice system is not only one that catches criminals, it is one that learns from failures. It is one that improves. It is one that protects everyone. Christine's case became part of that process. The pain surrounding her story created important conversations about investigative methods, evidence, and accountability. Her tragedy became a reason for change. And although nothing could undo what happened, the lessons learned from her case continue to have meaning. The story of Christine Jessup also shows the importance of patience. Modern society often wants immediate answers. People want quick solutions. They want mysteries solved quickly. But the truth does not always arrive quickly. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes it takes decades. Sometimes it requires the courage to keep looking when others believe the search is over. Christine's case proved that patience can matter, because after decades of silence, the truth finally appeared. Not through rumors, not through assumptions, but through evidence. That is why her story remains important. It shows that truth is stronger than time. It shows that justice can continue even after many years. And it shows that every victim deserves someone willing to keep searching. Christine Jessup's life was tragically short, but the impact of her story has lasted much longer. She became a symbol of why justice must be careful, why evidence must be respected, why victims must never be forgotten. Her story is painful, but it is also meaningful. It reminds us that every person has value. Every life leaves an impact. Every unanswered question matters. And every search for truth is worth continuing. Christine never had the chance to grow up. She never had the chance to tell her own story. But decades later, her story continues to speak. It speaks through the lessons learned. It speaks through the changes created. It speaks through the reminder that justice must always seek the truth above everything else. Because in the end, the greatest responsibility is not simply finding someone to blame. It is honoring the person who was lost. Christine Jessup was a child. Her life mattered. Her story mattered. And the truth that was finally found ensures that she will never be forgotten.